Simon's boots crunched onto a surprisingly well-maintained stretch of the risen road as they jogged toward a Calishite-style perimeter wall, freshly whitewashed and topped with smooth round tiles to prevent birds, squirrels, and ne'er-do-wells from climbing over. The wooden doors had been smashed in, and Simon was no expert, but the tracks in the mud looked goblin-sized. And warg-sized. A raid? Inside was what must have once been a fine bathhouse and inn. The plaque next to the splintered remains of the door attached to the broken hinges read, Joaquin's Rest, established 1347 DR. Now it was an inferno. Flames licked up the once charming and clean exterior through broken windows, and parts of the clay tile roof were already collapsing in. The courtyard was littered with bloodied bodies. Some were civilians who were dressed for a relaxing afternoon soak in the mineral spa. Others wore the garb of the Flaming Fist. They were an awful long way from Baldur's Gate. And the rest were the combattants du jour in the area, goblins and drow. Simon frowned, his gaze flicking over the scene quickly. Drow. Nettie had said that she and Halsin were attacked by drow who had been infected with mind flayer tadpoles in the forest. It seemed there were more of them. More of these absolutist nutters, Shadowheart remarked, pulling a familiar holy symbol from around the neck of one of the goblins. The drow, too. Strange, Astarion mused, stepping away from one of the elven bodies and leaving the armor behind. It had been in the sun too long, and its enchantment had evaporated. Lolth is not one to tolerate sharing her followers. Whatever this absolute offers her followers must be quite impressive to risk the Spider Queen's wrath. There was a dead drow autopsied in the grove, so there must be a few willing to take that risk, Simon remarked, turning over another body. He was dressed in the tough working clothes and leathers of a laborer, which only partially survived the fire, but had gone down fighting. He bore several sword wounds, and a broken dagger was still held in his curled death grip. Simon froze as his eyes landed on the tattoo on his burned and partially exposed chest. A twisting, winged serpent. Zhentarim. Astarion watched with interest as Simon, murmuring quietly under his breath, pulled out his obsidian dagger and sliced a deep gash across the dead man's chest. He then reached into his coin purse, now in at least a somewhat less easily snatchable place, and withdrew a gold piece, which he smeared with the man's blood and left glistening on his chest. It was shaped differently to the gold pieces commonly in trade up and down the Sword Coast. This far southeast many were of Omnian or Eltergardian mintage, but this one was 12-sided, like a Cormyran gold lion. I think that was too little too late as far as finishing him off goes, Astarion remarked. What do you know about the Zhentarim? Simon asked, his voice oddly quiet and pitched low, his lordly lordship tone. They're a protection racket, scoundrels working alongside the guild and slavers, Astarion said with distaste. They make just as much of their money guarding caravans as they do plundering them. That money goes east, to fund Zhentil Keep and their Black Army, and their war against the Dale lands, Simon growled, standing and spitting on the body before him. They've been raiding the Moonsea and the other northern Dales for 200 years, but it's a holy war for them against Fontdale, killing my people under their old black-handed banner. Search him, but leave the coin. When his fellows come to collect him, I want them to know I was here, he ordered. As Simon stalked off, Astarion knelt to rummage through the dead man's things, as if he had to be told to do such a thing. How did Simon think so many of the little luxuries of camp had come into their possession? And curiously lifted the coin, wiping the blood from the face. The man in profile was unmistakable, even with long, flowing hair in the portrait. It was pulled up to reveal his pointed ear, after all, and around the outside edge of the coin were stamped the words, Simon, D.G., Valifont, Rex, F.D. 1471, D.R. Oi, everyone! We need your help over here, Will called, ignoring the earrings entirely in the moment. At the far end of the courtyard, several flaming fists were struggling with the door to the inn, the iron ring handles far too hot to touch. "Come on, we need more manpower over here," one of the fists called. "There are still people inside." "Watch the windows," another yelled, flames crawling up the side of the building through the broken glass. Others, both fists and able-bodied civilians, hurried back and forth from the fountain in the middle of the courtyard, splashing water across doorways and into windows and over able-bodied men and women preparing to brave the inferno. "Cale, with me," Simon called, jogging forward and drawing his staff from where it was slung across his back, druidic magic pulsing in the living wood. "There's a scroll I think you'll find useful in my bag." "I think I know just what you mean," Gale grinned, their tadpoles reaching for one another for the barest of moments. Yellow wax, blue ribbon, birch rather than parchment. He pulled the scroll out of Simon's pack and snapped open the seal with a flourish, unfurling it, and with a glance to Simon to time their breathing together, began to chant. Their voices struck the weave in unison, and a soothing, distant rumble of thunder rolled as rain began to fall over the burning building. "Thunder? Really?" Shadowheart frowned. "Sorry, creative flourish," Gale said sheepishly. "Come on, everybody, time to be big damn heroes," Karlach grinned, rushing to join the fists who were struggling with the door. "Make way for the axe lady!" With two great swings and a shoulder charge, Karlach knocked one of the doors from its hinges, the splintered remains revealing a burning beam which blockaded the door from the inside. "Tam! You lot! Start looking for another way in. I'll work at this door," she ordered. The flaming fists didn't hesitate in following her command, scattering across the grounds. "Need a hand?" Will called, dark fire wreathing his fingers. "Yeah, time it with me. 1, 2, 1, 2. Karlach grinned, as the pair of them hacked and blasted the blazing door to smithereens. "Be careful inside," Simon called, his fingers tensely raised as he sought to wring every last drop of water from the weave. The interior of the inn was dark and bright all at once, choked with black smoke and rolling heat as flames licked up the walls and over roofing beams. The downpour Gale and Simon summoned was helping, but it wouldn't be enough. Not at this rate. Karlach pointed for the stairs. They still looked all right for the moment. "You go left, I'll go right," Karlach yelled through the roar of the flames, headed up the staircase first. "Watch the handrail, she's hot!" Will was in no position to argue. He took the stairs 2 at a time to match Karlach's stride and ducked past her as she pounded on a door. "Anybody in there? Yell if you need help!" Will didn't waste time in asking. He dashed for a shut door on the other side of the mezzanine, his good eye closed against the smoke and heat. "Get back from the door!" he yelled to anyone who may be listening before firing a blast, the door splintering under eldritch power. Will charged in and immediately reached for the hunched, coughing form on the floor. "Can you stand?" he shouted over the sounds of the building breaking apart around them. "Yes!" came a choked reply. "Keep your hand on my shoulder. I'll lead you out," Will said, helping her to her feet and heading for the door. A gut of flame burst out of the doorway Karlach had been beating down, followed by Karlach herself. "This way, mate! Follow my voice!" she called behind her. "Watch the floor and the doorway! Will, you first! Let's go!" "Will!" the woman repeated, coughing. "Come on, down the stairs," Will instructed, though whether to his charge or himself remained to be seen. He hurried them both along as quickly as he could, the water only just starting to soak through the roof as he retreated. The cool blue sky and sunlight was a welcome relief as they clambered past the wreckage of the front door. Several other coughing, bleeding, panting men and women, some wearing the garb of the Flaming Fist and others dressed for a trip to the public bath, were gathered near the fountain in the courtyard. Much of the water had already been scooped out by the bucketful and tossed onto burning carts and into doorways and windows. Simon and Gale had left their previous positions, trying to ice over as much as they could. It wouldn't be enough. Will could see that plain as day. "Are you all right, miss?" Will asked as they came more fully into the courtyard. As he looked at his charge, however, he gave a start. "Councillor Florrick!" The woman stood to her full height, and even beneath the soot and blood her elven beauty shone through. Her dark eyes met Will's and widened in horror. "Will! By the maimed god, what's happened to you? A tale of woe for another time. What happened here? We were escorting the Grand Duke back from Elturel and stopped here for a debrief and some well-deserved respite, Floric began, when the inn was attacked by drow and goblins. The Grand Duke? Will repeated, eyes widening. The drow took him, Floric replied, a sympathetic crease crossing her brow. Where? Will asked. Westward. Our scouts had indicated some unusual goblin activity in the area, but we didn't imagine this. If they're being commanded by drow. There's report of an army of goblins near here, and we saw phase spiders coming up from the Underdark, Simon said, looking from Will to the counselor. She seemed somewhat familiar, but he couldn't place her face. She must not have been terribly important to his work, Simon reasoned. Thank you, Lord Fontdale. Ah, someone in an office in Parliament, no doubt. Simon's mind began tying together as many loose strands of memory as he could, trying to trace the places he'd seen this woman in his past. Floric continued speaking, oblivious to Simon's mental scavenger hunt. Not surprising that all sorts of ghastly sorts would seize on the opportunity that Elturel's descent opened up, she said, her expression twisting in disgust. But to kidnap Grand Duke Ravengard. He's the glue holding Baldur's Gate together. This cannot be a coincidence. Elturel is in shambles, and with the Grand Duke in their grasp, it will throw Baldur's Gate into chaos as well. What are your orders, Consular? One of the soldiers asked, his tabard singed and soot-covered. We have to get the injured to safety. Gauntlet, take 2 of your fists to Rosimorn Monastery. Tell them that we have wounded incoming. We'll bring the civilians there. Then I want to regroup our forces and rescue the Grand Duke as soon as possible. Fist, report to your men up and have them send reinforcements. Will, I'm sure there's no love lost between you two, but to have the Blade of Frontiers on the trail would be of great assistance, Floric said, turning to Shadowheart. You there! You're a cleric, aren't you? I don't have the authority to order you, but if you could get these people at least stabilized so they could make it to the monastery. I'm sure your people will be able to help, she said, gesturing to the disguised holy symbol on her chest. Of course, Counselor, Shadowheart said, almost immediately falling into the character of a quiet, dutiful cleric. Will hardly let a few minutes of work go by of clearing debris and tending to the wounded before he came to Simon's side, anxious. Simon, please. We've got to go after them. The Grand Duke, he's my father, Will said with a touch of trepidation. Simon's eyes widened, and Will worried somewhat for all the wheels he could suddenly see turning behind Simon's eyes. So that's how we knew one another, Simon cried, far too excited for the moment. Oh, that explains so much. You were the Grand Duke's +1 at the wedding. No wonder I didn't recognize you. You were a bit rounder in the face then, he smiled, and shorter hair. Simon, ought we not get back to business? Gale suggested, looking between the two. Yes, please, Will said, tension still evident. They took him west, Floric said. If we hurry down the Risen Road, we might yet catch them. We may have had a falling out, but he's still my father, and more to the point, he's the Grand Duke. We have to save him, he continued, speaking faster and faster. You're preaching to the converted, Will, Simon replied, laying a gentle hand on his shoulder. I agree. The Grand Duke is far too important to leave aside. He's also far too important to kill. We have matters here that need handling first, matters you've been insisting on, he added, giving him a serious look. We know that the goblins, the absolutists, take prisoners, hostages. Grand Duke Ravengard alive is a powerful bargaining chip. Dead, he means war with the Lord's Alliance and their auxiliaries. Half of Faerun will pounce like starved wolves on this cult. Whoever's running the show doesn't want that. I know that for certain. But... Will cut himself off, his shoulders drooping slightly. Yes. You're right, he admitted, agony flowing under his words. But as soon as we've got the refugees on the road, we go after him. He was out here helping the people of Elturel, and by the 3, I'll finish what he started. You're a good man, Will, Gale smiled, clapping him lightly on the shoulder. We've got more to worry about as well than I think the Grand Duke will want to know about. I think the Zhentarim are supplying these absolutists, Simon stated. And what makes you say that, Lord Fontdale? Floric asked, no longer content to merely listen in. I found a Zent among the dead here, Simon replied, his expression hardening, unless you got fists who are serving two masters. That's a troubling finding, and a troubling accusation for the Zhentarim to be connected with an attack against the Council, Floric said. I know you Easterners have your difficulties with the Zhentarim, but they do behave themselves along the coast, relatively speaking. Counselor! Reporting! An out-of-breath Fist scout called, running back into the courtyard. Contact made with Githyanki on the Risen Road. They're sending for reinforcements. Dragons? Floric asked, eyes wide. Unknown, ma'am. My kin. We must go. They can lead us to the crash, Lae'zel demanded, turning and running across the courtyard. Counselor, I'm afraid we must away. Our matter with the Githyanki is urgent, Simon said. Shadowheart, we must fly. Right, she said, immediately abandoning the injured fish she was bandaging and hurrying off. Lae'zel, wait for us, Simon called into his hearing. Don't get separated. Perhaps you should run faster. I will not wait for purification. The track was relatively level, an easy run for anyone, but even easier for soldiers like Lae'zel and Karlach. Despite his own admonitions, Simon found himself falling behind and tried to control his breathing so as not to let on how winded he actually was. As he finally rounded a bend after the others, he saw a guard tower overlooking two bridges into the mountains. One a sturdy stone bridge, headed westward toward Baldur's Gate, though the signpost read Moonrise Towers. Must be an overland waypoint, Simon thought. Though he traveled to and from the gate each year for the season, he was far less familiar with the landmarks on foot compared to the shape of the riverbanks. The other, a somewhat precarious-looking wooden span, crossed the ravine toward the northwest, marked as leading to the Rosymorn Monastery and bearing the symbol of Lathander on the signage. From the vantage point of the guard tower, they could see Flaming Fist scouts arguing loudly with a few Githyanki at the near end of the bridge. One deathly pale and dressed in fine armor, much like Lae'zel's, while the other two seemed to be in somewhat ill-fitting leathers, as though they'd recently had a growth spurt. Privates on patrol, Simon reasoned. Anyone of higher rank would never go out looking so haphazard. Though the echoes of their voices around the walls of the ravine made it almost impossible to hear the conversation, it was easy enough to draw conclusions. The Fists were still on the near side of the span, after all. "This is your last chance!" was yelled with enough force that it cut through the echoes and the rumble of the rushing waters below. A great beating of wings and an enormous shadow blotting out the sun heralded the arrival of the reinforcements the Fist messenger had suggested before. Fire-red scales glinted in the noonday sun as a great red dragon swooped overhead, kiting and wheeling in a flashy display of skill and threat. Simon couldn't hear the Githyanki's words, but he could read her lips. "No, Istik, look up. It is your last chance." A red dragon. A Githyanki knight's steed. Lae'zel sighed in reverence, not sharing the same undercurrent of fear as her companions. The dragon made the slightest adjustment in its course overhead and swooped down toward the bridge, sending the flaming fists scattering even before the dragon breathed out a great, searing burst of flame. The bridge went up like tinder, collapsing into the ravine below as the Githyanki on the ground set upon the flaming fists. "Should we help them?" Karlach asked. It was unusual to hear her so unsure of something. "I may be fine in the sun now, but dragon fire still kills a vampire very efficiently," Astarion said, watching as the two youths swung their blades, seemingly under the careful eye of the armored Gith on the ground. "Mind your follow-through, Wurs," she said almost lazily. "You won't always be able to rely on brute strength over technique." The dragon doubled back and landed with an earth-shaking crash, its Githyanki rider leaping from its back without hesitation. "Stop wasting time, Beretha. You're not here to play with the locals." "Of course, Kithrak. We merely sought to—" "No excuses," the man snapped. "Chimar Salav Lakith," Lae'zel gasped, golden eyes widening. "Kithrak Voss." one of the greatest Gishin to ever wield silver. He's contacted me, though he did not tell me he was so close at hand. Come, we must speak with him, she insisted. Hang on, when did he contact you? Simon asked. He visited me last night, projected into my dreams. He assured me that so long as we remain near the relic, we will be safe from advancement of our infections. But slowed or not, I know we still must reach a Kresh to be purified once and for all. You're trusting a dream? Astarion asked with a scoff. Simon has received visions which revealed truth on several occasions since we met on the Gake ship. I trust his visions. And I trust when a Kithrak projects their consciousness to me. She left her explanation at that, and strode out confidently from their vantage point behind the guard tower. Oh, hells, Simon sighed, hurrying after her. He'd never negotiated with Githyanki before, but if anyone in their group could do it, he imagined it would be him. They were soldiers, after all. He was accustomed to that. Ryder, my time is short. Lead me to— Shh. Such a familiar tone, the Gith man chided. Were I not merciful, I would slice the skin clean from your meat. Yet you are not bleeding, for I am nothing if not merciful. Your name, child? Lae'zel blinked, surprised at his request. Lae'zel, she answered slowly, watching the man with eagle-eyed care. Proud. Regal, even, he remarked. And you will call me Gestil Kithrak. Voss, Knight Supreme, Lae'zel supplemented. The Queen's silver, the Queen's sword. I am who you say, Voss said, matter-of-factly, apparently indifferent to Lae'zel's state of shock. A Gake vessel has fallen from the sky. Thieves aboard have taken a weapon most precious. It is polyhedric in shape and inscribed with the sacred runes of our people. A surge of recognition shot across their tadpoles, along with a sting of anxiety from Shadowheart, and oddly enough, from the relic itself. Clearly word had gotten out about it in spite of their secrecy. Simon's gaze flicked to Lae'zel. Her emotions were different. Suspicious, rather than anxious, although her expression was like stone. Take word to your Kresh, Voss ordered. You are to join our search. Speak, child. Affirm your mandate. Lae'zel hesitated, and Simon could feel a tingle of suspicion and deception beginning within her mind. Play along, Simon thought to her as he watched Voss carefully, looking for signs of doubt or suspicion. You honor me with this duty, Kithrak. I shall alert my caretaker with haste, she said carefully, bending her back in a way that Simon hadn't known until then that she was capable of in anything but theory. Voss gave a curt nod and returned to her bow, seemingly content with her response. You serve your queen well, he said, then gestured towards the rest of the party. Take your Revrikali and search for survivors of the Megake ship. We've not found the weapon amid the wreckage, so they must carry it. I fly now to Vlaakith, our undying queen. She will see your faith rewarded in this plane and ours. Kodenos! Ostrat! The great dragon lowered his head to allow Voss to climb upon his back and hold on tight. Simon couldn't help but notice there was no saddle, no reins. No dragon would allow such things, of course, and it was a testament to the skill of the rider in question to ride a red dragon bareback. Incredible. Once you've reported your new orders to your Kresh, bring all reports first to Kresh Yilek, across the span in the mountains. Chariva Wargaz and Gestil Kithrak will be most interested in your findings. Whoever you are. The pale-skinned Gith sniffed, turning and stepping over the bodies of the flaming fists they had slaughtered. Come, we'll have to go the long way now, she called to the two other Gith, who fell in wordlessly behind her as she crossed the shorter stone bridge. He did not recognize me, Lae'zel said after the other Githyanki had retreated from earshot, confusion knitting her thin brows for a long moment. Not even a covert signal. You can't expect an important man to go out of his way for you, Astarion chided gently. Important people love to ignore the rank and file. But he spoke to me in my dream, called me by name, knew much more about the relic. Her confusion turned to suspicion. Either that was not Kithrak Voss, or the man we spoke to now is not Kithrak Voss. "I think I know where my money's at," Shadowheart remarked. "Dreams are filled with all sorts of deception and outright nonsense. It's why you have to be a trained diviner to sort the wheat from the chaff," she said, nodding in Simon's direction. "Speaking of deception, is it common for Gith to lie to one another so much?" Simon asked, looking back at Lae'zel. "He said he was returning word to your queen, but that is not where he's going." "An impostor, then," Lae'zel growled. "Where is he headed?" "I don't know. Only that he wanted to obfuscate," Simon replied. "But he wasn't particularly good at it, hence the question." "Since you asked, no," Lae'zel replied. "Truth is necessary in a chain of command. You should know this." "So is disinformation to confound spies," Simon countered. "We can discuss military subterfuge on the way to the creche," Lae'zel declared, beginning to march down the stone bridge that the other Gith had left minutes before. "It must be near if those soldiers wanted to bring wounded from the inn there." As soon as his foot touched the stone of the bridge, Simon felt a sudden, cold wave of anxiety wash over him, settling like a stone in his stomach. No, settling like an iron artifact. "Lae'zel, wait!" Simon called, hurrying after her, the others jogging to catch up to his long-legged strides. Simon wasn't sure if he saw it or foresaw it. Before they'd reached the end of the bridge, Lae'zel's back suddenly arched with pain, sending her to her knees. The same blast of pain racked Simon's body not even a fraction of a second after her, sending him tumbling to the ground. He didn't remember hitting the stone, but when he wrenched his eyes open, he was staring into dirty masonry. Even over his own cries, he could hear the others wailing in agony, their armor scraping the stone as they writhed. "Hear my voice. Obey my command." Simon's vision swam with darkness as he felt something prying into his mind. The hand reaching for him felt enormous, incomprehensibly large, but had the deftness and precision of an assassin as it pressed through the worm, forcing his attention upward. Understanding thrummed through him. This was it. Her. The Absolute. He let his jaw slacken and breathed slowly. If a god wished to speak, his lips were ready. It did not need to be so forceful. In the midst of the dark, 3 figures arose within Simon's consciousness, though their forms were barely visible in this place. An elven man, clad in heavy armor with the bearing of a general, appeared first, and from behind him rose 2 others, human, as far as he could tell, a man and a woman, each dripping with the sort of authority normally only enjoyed by kings and emperors. The man's charisma seeped out of the dark, a charming smile and quick word palpable, while the woman's body was tense and coiled with eager, predatory intent. Simon felt his back bending farther in obedience. He did not resist. Too many years of prophecy and divine speech had passed for him to even think of resisting a god's visions, even one that was not his own. He saw nothing else in the moment. Was this a fixed point? It didn't feel like any prophecy he'd ever received before. What an aggressive vision! His mind raced and reeled, his consciousness batted back and forth between the elements of this vision. Order, neutrality, and chaos, clearly, but who were they? As if sensing his question, she answered. "These are my chosen. They speak for me. Aid their search for the prism, and you will be worthy to stand beside them in my presence." He felt a trembling, which intensified into a vibration, a rising heat from his bag. the pouch he'd stashed the relic inside. Guided by divine purpose, Simon reached for it blindly, his gaze focused on the three figures looming in his view as the voice rose around him like floodwaters. Whatever this was, it was how it must be. As his fingers closed around the relic, he sensed something else. Defiance. He raised the relic high, and it left his fingers of its own accord, a fiery flare sweeping out from it, engulfing them all, dispelling the three figures like wisps of smoke. All at once, the pain ceased. The roaring in his ears, the splitting in his skull, the churning of his stomach as he thought for one long, terrifying moment that this would be his end so far from home. It all began to fade, along with her voice. My power grows. My forces gather. The reckoning draws near. He gasped and coughed as he lay on the ground for a few moments more, wanting to be sure his breakfast would remain in place before attempting to rise. Slowly he pushed himself onto his knees, his forehead still against the ground like a penitent. There was a heavy metallic clank against the paving stones, and when Simon opened his eyes, the relic sat innocently next to him, still warm from the power it channeled. What the fuck was that? Karlach asked, her voice shaking more than any of them were used to hearing. A vision. A revelation, Simon panted. That's a vision! That's what you do all day in your temple? See shit like that? No thank you, Karlach panted. Wait, you saw it too? Simon asked, turning a little too quickly and sending his head spinning and stomach lurching. I don't know that I've ever shared a vision with anyone else. Well, save for Ao's Annunciation, of course. But this was different, thankfully. His stomach contents stayed where it belonged, for now. As soon as he pushed himself upright, the relic sprang into his hands like an exuberant pup, but otherwise sat dormant in his grasp. The relic. It quelled the voice, stilled the tadpoles, Lae'zel said, though there was a clear change in her tone. The determination had drained away, replaced with uncertainty, indecision, fear. It was decidedly unlike her. Lae'zel, are you all right? Will asked, offering a hand to help her to her feet. I do not know, she said, bewildered to admit such a thing and willingly accepting his assistance in her confusion. I am loath to retreat, but... She screwed her face as though still in pain under the press of the voice of the Absolute. After a long moment of rationalization, she continued. We may need to find an alternate approach to reach the crash. A retrograde advance, I concur. Simon nodded, rising on slightly shaking legs. I don't want to test the limits of how much protection this relic can provide. Not if we don't have to. Perhaps it would behoove us to at least hear Auntie Ethel's offer, he said, his grimace matching Lae'zel's. We mustn't let the Gith gain possession of that artifact. Present company accepted, Gale said. Not if it's protecting us from something that dangerous. I agree, Lae'zel said, earning looks of surprise from the others. I trust Kithrak Voss, but I do not know which Kithrak I have encountered is the true one. I will not give the relic to an impostor. Until I can be certain, it shall remain with us. That's the most sensible thing you've said yet, Shadowheart said, though her slightly teasing tone undercut her somewhat. There was undeniable honesty in the words. We should make our way back. Tell Councillor Florrick that the monastery probably isn't an option. With Gith on the road and whatever the hell's that thing was in our heads. Will sighed. If we can recover the first druid, then he may permit the injured to convalesce in the grove, Gale suggested. It's certainly a better option than running Shadowheart ragged trying to heal everyone's burns and remove worms. That's actually quite a good idea, Simon observed, nodding. Yes, much appreciated, Shadowheart added. Just trying to be useful, Gale beamed. Let's hurry back, Simon said, brushing his knees clean and tucking the relic back into his bag. They barely passed the guard tower which overlooked the bridges along the Risen Road when Astarion let out a frustrated groan. Oh, hells, what's that now? Astarion asked, pointing to more rising plumes of smoke. That had better not be our camp. I worked damn hard to steal all my things. Hells. More of these war bands on the move, probably, Will said, hurrying down a side trail to try to get a better view. After a few moments his voice rang out from a distance before coming through much clearer in their ears. You'd all better see this. Hurrying down the trail, Simon and the others found themselves treated to a fantastic view of the valley below. Stretching across the valley floor was a grand domed temple. Though the silver and gold leaf that once decorated the roof and finials had been washed away or looted, the stone edifice still stood strong, even after it was certainly submerged during the great rain. Plumes of smoke rose from various points in the courtyard and surrounding grounds, and the smell of sweat and animal began to creep into one's nose the longer one stood observing. It was nowhere near as orderly as Simon was used to seeing, but he recognized an army camp when he saw one. Dozens of tents and lean-tos dotted the landscape. Each could house at least 4 goblins, Simon quickly began to calculate. With haphazard observation posts erected along the bank of the stream, the teeming sensation of movement below reminded Simon strongly of the spiders earlier that morning. Golly, Gale whispered, eyes wide. A whole army of goblins, right on the druid's doorstep. They need to know about this. It's more like a company, Will said, not a whole army. That seems rather a distinction without a difference in our case, Gale replied, frowning. We're barely a platoon ourselves. Forcing them through a choke point would even the odds, Karlach observed. Yes, though without reinforcements we'd eventually be run down, Shadowheart countered. Subterfuge and traps to thin their numbers first. You're not seriously thinking of fighting them? Gale asked, brows raising. I love a good bloodbath as much as anyone, but you're insane, Astarion huffed. It would take hours to kill them all. A worthy challenge. Were we to rally forces from the locals? Lae'zel began planning under her breath. Aren't you all forgetting something? Will asked, his brows knit with worry. There are a lot of civilians around here. The refugees, the injured back at Waukeen's Rest. I'll second that notion, Simon sighed. I think we should do as Zevlor recommended. Take out their leadership and they'll crumble to their own infighting and tribal loyalties. Work smarter, not harder, Shadowheart nodded. And if a few others get in our way, then they get what they get, Karlach grinned, punching her palm to punctuate her point. Let's hurry. We have to catch Korga on our way back and stop her from throwing everyone to the wolves, Will said, climbing back up the trail with determination on his face.